One thing I actually really appreciate about Trump being president is that we get to learn about all the different departments of the federal government through his scandals. Like, I didn't even know what BLS, Bureau of Labor and Statistics, was until he fired the commissioner or whatever, and now we all know.
And another department that we're looking at really closely and talking about these days is the Department of Justice, which has undergone this massive transformation since Trump took over. I mean, we're all hearing about how this administration has weaponized the DOJ, and we really wanted the story to be like an insider look into what's going on right now and how that's happening.
So, in normal times, the DOJ is there to uphold the rule of law, keep our country safe, and protect our civil rights. And it's the umbrella under which dozens of really important agencies fall, like FBI, Drug Enforcement Agency, Attorney General's offices, and the Bureau of Prisons.
Right. So it's this super powerful agency. And we all kind of, as a country, realized how important it was for the DOJ to be independent after Watergate, when Nixon started interfering with his own investigation. And that's when all these special offices and agencies started being created to keep justice impartial and apolitical within the DOJ. But that's all starting to kind of change.
Yeah, Trump's been weaponizing the DOJ, basically using it as his own personal attack dog, going after his political enemies, just carrying out his wishes. Obviously, the Comey indictment is a great example of that. And because of this, there's been a recent mass resignation of Justice Department lawyers, and it's the biggest since Watergate.
And it's not happening in back rooms and under tables. Trump has loudly and proudly been kind of directing his Attorney General Pam Bondi to go after what he calls enemies of the state. And it's not like Trump has ever really been that secretive about his enemies. Even when he was campaigning during the first term, he was talking about locking up Hillary Clinton and all of that. But what's different now is that he kind of has this system in place to actually make all of that happen, and the DOJ is a really big part of that.
So we are thrilled to talk to Mary McCord. She's the former acting assistant attorney general for national security at the DOJ. She was a longtime prosecutor. She's now the executive director of the Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection and a visiting professor at Georgetown Law. She spent 25 years in the executive branch, mostly at the DOJ, so she knows better than anyone how it's supposed to operate and how different it is now.
So Mary, before we get into what's kind of happening at the DOJ right now, can you explain to us what it was like when you worked there? What dictated what you investigated?
So your cases were based on following the facts and the law. Do these facts and the evidence that support these facts, would this lead to a violation of law that is an important federal interest? Not an important interest of the president necessarily, but an important federal interest to make it worthwhile prosecuting. Now, I will say, presidents definitely can have different priorities, and it is perfectly appropriate, and elections have consequences for presidents to say to their attorney general, I want to prioritize transnational drug trafficking, or I want to prioritize white collar corruption cases and not prioritize the other things.
That is perfect to set the scene because we understand things are operating pretty differently now. So you recently said the pillars of our democratic foundation and the rule of law are being eroded. So we have to ask you, what have you seen that makes you say that's being eroded?
Well, if you will permit me, I'll tell you what I mean about these pillars of the rule of law, because I do think that in America, we don't speak in terms of the rule of law that much. First is a system of laws by which both the government and the governed agree to abide. So the Constitution, obviously, laws passed by Congress. Second is transparency in the enactment and the enforcement of those laws so that we have predictability and stability. Third is a fair system of legal adjudication of rights and responsibilities. And finally, diverse, competent, and independent lawyers and judges. And so we've seen the erosion of each one of these pillars of the rule of law. And if we just start with the first one, right, a separation of powers gives Congress the power of the purse, the power of legislation. And that means it is Congress that creates departments and agencies. Yet we've seen this president, started out through DOJ, and it's continued since then, dismantling whole departments and agencies, mass firings, taking them down to their bare minimum, independent agencies, and these are agencies that Congress intended to have some independence from the executive branch. We've seen those literally taken down in some cases to one person. Every time he gets rid of different programs or fires people or cancels grants, it was money that Congress appropriated for those purposes. We've seen the removal of members of bipartisan commissions extend beyond any one single president. But you've also seen, for example, the president ignoring other provisions of the Constitution, like the 10th Amendment, when he is now sending National Guard.
Oh my goodness. I can just imagine for you as someone who understands the rule of law, this system so well, how troubling it would be. And we understand you tried to give a warning before Pam Bondi was confirmed. You testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And can you tell us what your message was to Pam Bondi and to the committee?
I really had 3 points to make, was that her oath is to the Constitution and not to the president, because she had been one of the president's, defense lawyers in one of his impeachment trials. The second point was that if there are issues where your partiality could be called into question, you need to recuse yourself. And third, and maybe the most important, was what we've been talking about already, the importance of the independence of the Department of Justice. It shouldn't ever be the president sending a social media post to his attorney general saying, you need to investigate this person. I'm firing the person who won't do it. You need to make sure this gets done. And you know who I'm talking about, and that's the prosecution of James Comey. Like, that is something that is complete anathema to now decades and decades of departments of justice.
Because of all of this going on, though, we are curious if you can help us set the scene of what the mood is like inside the DOJ right now, because we do understand that so many people have resigned.
It's really hard for those of us who spent, decades there to see what's happening. And even in 2017, I stayed through transition, but it got to be hard for me because some of the things that the Attorney General at the time, Jeff Sessions, was wanting to do that were things that the president wanted to do, such as the Muslim ban, looking back, seems like such a small thing to get to leave over compared to what's happening now. And so I think what we're seeing more and more is that there are prosecutors who are, just resigning because they're being asked to do things that they don't feel are ethical or moral, or they just vehemently disagree. There's already some divisions that are down more than 50%.
Well, this is a really good opportunity to get into how the DOJ is being weaponized by the Trump administration, especially when it comes to going after his political enemies. We understand there's a provision in the DOJ manual that says you don't use federal prosecution to go after political rivals. So how is this even happening?
I think what we're seeing now is when you rely on norms, and it's not something that is, and even the policy you just mentioned, Mabel, that's within the Department of Justice guidance. Those are internal guidance, which of course the Attorney General can change at any time. Those are not statutes that require Congress. If you have an administration that does not care about those norms and does not have the same concerns about maintaining the integrity and independence of the Department of Justice, then the norms are not going to be good enough to hold.
And as of now, speaking of weaponization, kind of the most high profile right now is what you referenced earlier, former FBI Director Comey. Actually, there was some big news today about now we have a trial date and he's pled not guilty. But we understand there's some extremely big holes in this case, and that Trump's argument is extremely flimsy.
One of the problems is that the indictment is so minimal and provides so little information that not only legal analysts, but also and former prosecutors, but Comey and his own attorney are saying, we need more details about exactly what he's being charged with, because person 3 is not clear, person 1 is not clear. Those are terms used in the indictment. And we know the grand jury, even though Lindsay Halligan, his former defense attorney, who basically has spent her career doing insurance and never has been a prosecutor, who was then put in that position, had to go in on her own and seek a grand jury indictment. And I've now read reporting like there's no one else in that office who's willing to work this case. So a couple of prosecutors from North Carolina are coming up. The second huge problem is the vindictiveness, the maliciousness. I mean, the president has completely vilified James Comey for years. You don't talk about the defendants you've charged that way. You don't, they have a right to the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. So I think there will be a significant motion to dismiss for violations of due process because of the vindictiveness here.
I mean, it's so Just kind of funny to see how the administration is working so overtime to justify this case, while we also are seeing that friends of Trump in the administration are getting a lot of special treatment. Like we read reporting that the White House's immigration czar, Tom Homan, was caught on a recording accepting $50,000 in cash by an undercover FBI agent, where Homan basically promised government contracts in exchange for money.
Mhm.
So, what is the current DOJ's argument for not even prosecuting him, but not even investigating the case?
I will note that when that payment was made, this was before Trump was the president. And so it wasn't like it was, bribery requires you making that payment to somebody who is a public official. You would still keep the investigation open. And I think that's exactly why the FBI kept it open. I mean, in all of my years at the Department of Justice, this is not like controversial. This is what you would do. He had already accepted a payment, in return for promising if he was in that position, he can help steer government contracts. So of course you're going to want to see if that's what he's going to do once he gets that position. I mean, this is public corruption, just at its most basic level. But this administration has made it pretty clear, really, since almost immediately after January 20th, the priority was going to be going after sanctuary cities that don't voluntarily cooperate with ICE. And at the same time they said that, they basically said, we're going to completely deprioritize white collar public corruption cases, Foreign Agent Registration Act cases. So the message was sort of like public corruption, go ahead.
We wanted to wrap up with something that we hear from our audience a lot, which is that they're feeling really helpless and like they're just seeing this play out in the government and there's nothing they can do, but it's really obviously worrisome to see. Is there anything or what can everyday Americans that are watching this or listening to this do to try to stop this deterioration of justice and law?
Mobilize, organize. That means exercising your First Amendment rights, not just to protest, but to petition your elected officials. I think voting is so important, and protecting the integrity of our elections. And I don't mean just in 2028, but in 2026 and in the places that have elections 2025 this year. So all of those things are important. Amazing research over 100 years of where there are peaceful demonstrations in countries that either are having authoritarian rule or have basically been under colonization. And when 3.5% of the population engages in sustained, peaceful protest and demonstrations, no authoritarian or colonizer has been able to maintain control. I think that's a pretty amazing
Wow.
statistic, and particularly because it's all about peaceful demonstrations. The Women's March in 2017 was our biggest single day, protest that would have equaled something like 1.7% of the population. So we had a lot more people than that, about twice that, and it needs to be sustained. But the point is there's power of the people, and courage begets courage.